There's something peculiar happening right now, in this very moment, as you read these words or hear this voice speaking to you across the digital ether. You might think you're simply watching a video, absorbing information, perhaps learning something new about spirituality or consciousness. But what if I told you that while you've been sitting there, something has been standing directly in front of you? Something so obvious, so extraordinarily present, that you've been looking right through it your entire life. Not because it's hidden, but because you've been trained, conditioned, hypnotized into believing that what you're looking for must be somewhere else, somewhere distant, somewhere you haven't arrived yet. We live in a civilization that has made an art form out of postponement. Everything meaningful, we're told, exists just beyond the horizon of now. Happiness is waiting for you after you get that promotion, after you find the right relationship, after you finally understand yourself, after you achieve enlightenment. It's always after, always tomorrow, always in some imagined future that never quite arrives, because by the time you get there, you've already constructed another future to chase. This is the fundamental game of seeking, and it's the most addictive game human beings have ever invented. We become professional seekers, accumulating techniques and teachers and teachings, building elaborate maps of territories we never actually enter because we're too busy perfecting the map. But here's what Alan Watts understood with crystalline clarity, what mystics across traditions have pointed toward with their paradoxes and koans and impossible riddles. You cannot seek what you already are. The eye cannot see itself directly. The knife cannot cut itself. The finger cannot touch its own tip. And consciousness, this aware presence that you are right now, cannot become an object of its own observation. Yet we spend our lives trying to do exactly this impossible thing. We try to become conscious of consciousness, to be aware of awareness, to experience the experiencer. It's like trying to bite your own teeth or kiss your own lips. The very structure of the attempt guarantees its failure. And yet, mysteriously, this failure is not actually a problem. In fact, it's pointing towards something so simple, so immediately present, that when you finally stop trying to grasp it, you realize with a kind of cosmic humor that you've never been separate from it for even a single instant. This is the invisible door, not a mystical portal you have to earn access to through years of meditation or moral perfection or spiritual athleticism, but an opening that has always been open, a threshold you're already standing in, a dimension of your experience so intimate that you mistake it for nothing at all. Think about it this way. Right now, there's seeing happening. Not you seeing, but just the pure occurrence of visual experience. Colors, shapes, light, darkness, movement, stillness, all arising spontaneously in awareness. And there's hearing happening. Sounds appearing and disappearing in consciousness like waves on the ocean, not separate from the ocean, but made of the same substance. Thoughts are happening, sensations are happening, emotions are happening. But who is the one experiencing all of this? If you try to point to yourself, what do you actually find? You might point to your body, but the body is just another sensation appearing in awareness. You might point to your thoughts, but thoughts come and go. They can't be the constant experiencer because they're constantly changing. You might point to your feelings, but feelings are even more transient than thoughts. So who are you really? Not the conceptual answer you've been taught. I am a person with a history and a personality and a future. But the actual, immediate, lived reality of what you are right before you name it, before you think about it, before you turn it into an object of knowledge. This is what spiritually awake people notice. Not because they've achieved something extraordinary, but because they've stopped doing something ordinary. They've stopped running away from the present moment into psychological time. They've stopped trying to become something other than what they are. They've stopped believing the hypnotic story that they're separate from life, observing it from somewhere inside their heads, needing to control it and improve it and make it conform to their preferences. When this stopping happens, something astonishing reveals itself. Not in a dramatic flash of light or a supernatural experience, though those things might occur as side effects. What reveals itself is the sheer obviousness of what's always been here. It's like you've been wearing glasses your whole life and suddenly notice that you're looking through them. The glasses don't disappear, you still see through them. But now there's an awareness of the medium itself, the consciousness in which all experience appears. And once you notice this, once you become intimate with this aware presence that you are, you realize that it's not something personal or private. It's not yours in the sense that your thoughts or your body might seem to be yours. It's the space in which the entire universe appears, including the thought I and the feeling of being a separate self. This is why the spiritual path is such a magnificent cosmic joke. You set out to find yourself, to discover your true nature, to achieve enlightenment. You read books, attend workshops, practice meditation, do yoga, explore different traditions, and all of this is perfectly fine. It's part of the play, part of the dance. But eventually, if you're fortunate, you realize that you've been like someone searching everywhere for their glasses while wearing them the whole time. The spiritual search itself is what obscures the very thing you're searching for, because the search implies a seeker separate from what's sought, a subject trying to reach an object, someone here trying to get there. But in reality, there is no there to get to. There's only here, only now, only this. And this immediate present moment awareness is so simple that the mind overlooks it completely. The mind is designed to deal with complexity, with problems, with time. It's a magnificent instrument for navigating the practical world, for building civilizations and technologies and works of art. But when it comes to recognizing your fundamental nature, the mind is about as useful as trying to cut water with a knife. Not because your nature is something mystical or supernatural, but because it's too simple, too immediate, too obvious. It's the very ground of your being, the unchanging awareness in which all change appears. And you can't know this awareness as an object because you are this awareness. Let me put it differently. Every experience you've ever had, every thought, every feeling, every sensation, every perception, all of it has appeared in the same space. Not physical space, but the dimensionless space of consciousness itself. When you were 5 years old, playing in the backyard, experiences were appearing in awareness. When you were 15, navigating the tumultuous waters of adolescence, experiences were appearing in awareness. Right now, reading these words or hearing this voice, experiences are appearing in awareness. The contents have changed dramatically. Your body has changed, your thoughts have changed, your circumstances have changed, but the awareness in which everything appears has remained constant. It's like a mirror that reflects everything, but is never affected by what it reflects. The mirror doesn't become sad when it reflects a sad face, doesn't become angry when it reflects an angry scene, doesn't become old when it reflects an aging body. This is what you are. Not the reflected images, those come and go, but the mirror itself. And here's the extraordinary thing. The mirror is not separate from what it reflects. The reflection and the mirror are one reality appearing as two. Your true nature is not separate from this present moment experience. You're not awareness observing life from a distance. You're awareness being life, appearing as life, expressing itself as the entire play of existence. The wave is not separate from the ocean. The wave is the ocean waving, and you're not separate from consciousness. You are consciousness appearing as a person, as a body-mind, as a unique center of perception and experience. But, and this is crucial, you're not only that. You're not limited to being this particular body-mind. That's just one expression, one manifestation, one temporary formation in the infinite ocean of consciousness. When you identify exclusively with the wave, you feel separate, vulnerable, mortal. You think, I was born, I will die, I need to secure my survival, I need to become something, achieve something, prove something. This is the fundamental anxiety of the separate self. But when you recognize yourself as the ocean, when you notice the invisible door and step through it, you realize that while the wave will certainly crash and disappear, the ocean itself is never born and never dies. It simply is, eternally present, eternally creating new forms and dissolving old ones. This recognition doesn't mean you stop being a person or stop engaging with practical life. You still have responsibilities, relationships, preferences, desires. The body-mind continues to function, perhaps even more effectively because it's no longer burdened by the constant anxiety of defending and promoting a separate self. But there's a profound relaxation, a deep okayness with whatever is happening. Not because you've become passive or indifferent, but because you've recognized that you're not what you thought you were. You're not this little person struggling to survive in a hostile universe. You're the universe itself, temporarily appearing as this person, playing this particular role in the cosmic drama. And from this recognition flows what can only be called love, though it's not the personal love of liking and preferring. It's more like the love of water for being wet, the love of fire for being hot. It's the natural delight of consciousness in its own existence, its own creativity, its own endless capacity to manifest forms and experiences. You look at a tree and realize it's made of the same consciousness that's looking. You hear a bird singing and recognize that the hearing and the singing are one event, one movement of awareness. You encounter another person and see through the apparent separation to the shared ground of being that you both arise from. This is not a belief or a philosophy or a comforting idea. It's the direct recognition of what's actually true, right now, in this very moment. And the invisible door is simply the willingness to stop, to become still, to let the seeking mind come to rest and see what remains when you're not trying to get anywhere or become anything. What remains is this alive, aware, present experiencing that you've always been, but never quite noticed because you were too busy looking for it somewhere else. The reason spiritually awake people notice this door is not because they're special or more evolved or more deserving. It's because at some point, through grace or exhaustion or accident, they stopped believing their thoughts about reality and started paying attention to reality itself. They stopped living in the conceptual world of past and future, of problems and solutions, of self and other, and dropped into the immediate felt sense of being alive. And in that dropping, in that radical simplicity of just being here now, without agenda or interpretation, the door becomes visible. Or rather, it becomes obvious that there never was a door because there's nowhere to go and no one to go there. There's just this eternal present moment, this infinite awareness, this seamless flow of experience appearing and disappearing in consciousness. And the beautiful thing, the absolutely hilarious thing, is that even all of this talking about it, all these words and concepts and explanations, are just more content appearing in awareness. The real transmission, the real teaching, is happening in silence, in the space between the words, in the awareness that's aware of these words being read or heard. That's the invisible door. Not something mystical or far away, but the simple, ordinary, extraordinary fact of being aware right now. Not aware of something, but just aware. Just this. Just here. Just now. When we speak of doors in the spiritual context, we're usually employing a metaphor that both reveals and conceals. It reveals because it suggests transition, passage, movement from one state to another. It conceals because it implies that where you are now is not where you need to be, that there's somewhere else to go, some other condition to achieve. But the invisible door I'm pointing to is not like that at all. It's more like suddenly recognizing that the room you thought you were locked inside is actually infinite, that the walls you've been bumping against are made of thought, and that freedom isn't something you need to escape to. It's what you already are. Consider how you experience your life moment to moment. Most of us are walking around in a kind of trance, a hypnotic state where we're constantly narrating our experience to ourselves, interpreting everything through layers of conditioning, memory, and expectation. Something happens, let's say you receive an email, and before you've even fully read it, your mind has already categorized it, judged it, compared it to past emails, projected potential future consequences, and generated an emotional response based on all of this mental activity. The actual email, the simple fact of words on a screen, gets buried under this avalanche of psychological elaboration. And this is happening all the time with everything. You're not experiencing life directly. You're experiencing your thoughts about life, your stories about life, your interpretations and analyses and commentaries about life. This is what creates the sense of separation, of being locked inside your head, looking out at a world that's fundamentally foreign and other. You feel trapped in there with your thoughts and worries and memories, watching life happen through the window of your senses, but never quite touching it, never quite making real contact with reality. And from this position of separation, naturally you start seeking happiness, seeking meaning, seeking connection, seeking enlightenment. You think, if only I could understand myself better, if only I could purify my mind, if only I could achieve the right state of consciousness, then I would break through this glass and make real contact with life. But here's what's so easy to miss. The sense of being separate, of being trapped inside your head, is itself a thought. It's not actually true. It's a story you're telling yourself, a very convincing story based on the structure of language and the way our culture teaches us to think about consciousness. We're taught from the earliest age that we're separate individuals with an inner world and an outer world, with a mind inside a body, with thoughts and feelings that are private and personal and separate from the objective external reality. And this model is useful for certain practical purposes. It helps us navigate social life, maintain personal boundaries, take responsibility for our actions. But it's a model, a map, not the territory itself. The actual territory, the lived reality of your experience right now, is completely seamless. There's no inside and outside, no self and world, no subject and object. There's just this undivided whole, this single field of experiencing. When you hear a sound, is the hearing happening inside your head or where the sound appears to be? When you see this text, is the seeing happening behind your eyes or where the text is appearing? If you look carefully, without trying to answer the question conceptually, but simply checking your direct experience, you'll notice that experience itself doesn't divide into inner and outer. That division only appears when you think about experience, when you conceptualize it, when you create a mental model of what's happening. So the invisible door is not really a door at all. It's the recognition that you've never been enclosed, never been separate, never been trapped inside anything. The feeling of being imprisoned in your head is just another thought appearing in the open space of awareness. And when you see this, really see it, not as a belief or an idea, but as the immediate recognition of what's actually true, something shifts. Not in some dramatic, once-and-for-all transformation, but in a subtle relaxation, a gentle release of the chronic tension of maintaining the separate self. This is why spiritual awakening is often described as utterly ordinary and yet absolutely miraculous. Ordinary because nothing changes. You're still the same person, still have the same life, still have to deal with the same challenges and responsibilities. Miraculous because everything changes. The whole context shifts. The background consciousness that you're operating from reveals itself to be completely different from what you thought. It's like you've been watching a movie your whole life, totally absorbed in the drama, identified with the protagonist, suffering their sorrows and celebrating their triumphs. And then suddenly, you become aware that you're sitting in a theatre, that you're the space in which the movie appears, that none of it has ever touched you, harmed you, or improved you. The movie continues, the story goes on, but your relationship to it is completely transformed. And from this new relationship, this awakened perspective, you can finally enjoy the movie. You can participate fully in the drama of being human without getting lost in it, without believing that the story on screen is the totality of what you are. You can feel emotions deeply without being overwhelmed by them because you know they're waves in the ocean of consciousness, not fundamental threats to your existence. You can have preferences and desires without clutching at them desperately because you know that whether they're fulfilled or frustrated, you remain untouched in your essential nature. This is what it means to be spiritually awake, not to transcend life or escape from the human condition, but to recognize your true position in relation to it. You're not in life. Life is in you. You're not having experiences. You are experiencing itself, consciousness appearing as this particular perspective, this particular body-mind, this particular point of view. And once this is clearly seen, the whole spiritual search naturally comes to an end. Not because you've achieved something or arrived somewhere, but because you've recognized that you've never been anywhere else but here, never been anything else but this aware presence. Now the mind might hear all of this and think, okay, great, so how do I get there? What's the practice? What's the technique? And this is the trickiest part, because the question itself arises from the separate self, from the seeker, from the one who thinks they need to become something other than what they are. Any technique you undertake will be done by this illusory separate self, which only reinforces the illusion of separation. It's like trying to use darkness to create light, or using ego to transcend ego. The very effort perpetuates the problem. But this doesn't mean that practices are useless. They have their place, their value. Meditation can be beautiful, helpful, transformative. It can quiet the mind, open up space, reveal patterns of conditioning, cultivate presence. But meditation doesn't create awareness. It simply removes some of the obscurations that prevent you from noticing the awareness that's always already here. It's like cleaning a window. The cleaning doesn't create the view. It just makes the view more apparent. And you can spend years polishing that window, making it clearer and clearer, which is wonderful. But at some point, you might realize that you've been able to see through the window the whole time, even when it was dirty. The dirty window never actually blocked the light. It just made you think the light was somewhere on the other side. This is the paradox at the heart of spiritual practice. You need to make effort until you realize that effort is unnecessary. You need to seek until you discover that seeking is what's hiding what you're looking for. You need to become someone until you recognize that you're no one and everyone simultaneously. It's like the Zen metaphor of the pathless path. There's nowhere to go, yet the going is essential. There's nothing to achieve, yet the striving teaches you everything. There's no one to become, yet the becoming reveals what you've always been. And the invisible door stands at the center of this paradox. It's invisible not because it's hidden, but because it's too close, too obvious, too present. It's like asking a fish to recognize water. The fish is so immersed in water, so completely one with its environment, that the water is imperceptible. Only when the fish jumps out of water for a moment does it recognize what it's been swimming in all along. Similarly, you're so completely immersed in consciousness, so utterly one with awareness, that you don't notice it. You think you're having awareness, using awareness, operating within awareness. But actually, you are awareness. There's no separation whatsoever. And here's what makes this recognition so transformative. When you know yourself as awareness, rather than as the content appearing in awareness, you become unstuck from your circumstances. Your well-being is no longer dependent on things going your way, on life conforming to your preferences, on getting what you want and avoiding what you don't want. Not because you become cold or detached or indifferent to life, but because you recognize that your fundamental nature is already complete, already whole, already free. The circumstances of your life, your relationships, your health, your financial situation, your achievements or failures, these are all waves on the surface of the ocean. They matter at their level, certainly. You still engage with them, still work to improve things, still feel the full range of human emotions. But they don't define you anymore. They don't determine whether you're fundamentally okay or not okay. This is perhaps the most profound gift of spiritual awakening, this unconditional okayness with whatever is arising in the present moment. It's not about positive thinking or forcing yourself to be happy when you're sad or pretending that everything is fine when it's not. It's much deeper than that. It's the recognition that even in the midst of difficulty, even in the midst of pain or loss or uncertainty, there's something in you that remains untouched, unchanged, at peace. Not the peace of having no problems, but the peace of being spacious enough to hold all problems, all emotions, all experiences, without being overwhelmed by them. And you know what's beautiful about this? Once you stop needing life to be different than it is, once you stop resisting what is, you actually become much more effective at dealing with life's challenges. Resistance creates friction, tension, conflict. Acceptance creates flow, flexibility, intelligence. When you're not constantly fighting against reality, when you're not arguing with what is, you have much more energy and clarity to respond appropriately to whatever situations arise. You stop wasting energy on psychological suffering, the suffering that comes from wanting things to be different than they are, and you're left only with pain, which is unavoidable but much more manageable without the overlay of resistance. This is what enlightened teachers mean when they talk about surrendering to what is, accepting the present moment, saying yes to life. It sounds passive, like you're supposed to just lie down and let life roll over you. But it's actually the most active, alive, responsive way of being. It's the difference between a rigid tree that breaks in the storm and a bamboo that bends with the wind. The bamboo doesn't resist the storm, it dances with it. And when the storm passes, the bamboo returns to its natural upright position, completely unharmed. You, in your true nature as awareness, are like that bamboo. Life brings its storms, its losses and disappointments and challenges, and these are felt, these are experienced. But they don't break you because you're not rigid, not holding on to some idea of how things should be. You're flexible, responsive, surrendered to what is. And in that surrender, paradoxically, you discover your true power. Not the power of control, which is always limited and always ultimately fails, but the power of presence, the power of being fully here, fully available, fully alive to whatever is happening. Let's go deeper into what prevents us from noticing this invisible door, because understanding the mechanism of the obscuration is itself a form of liberation. The primary obstruction is not some external force or some inherent limitation of human consciousness. It's much more intimate and subtle than that. The primary obstruction is the continuous habit of psychological time, the incessant movement of mind away from the present moment into a past that no longer exists, and a future that hasn't arrived yet. Think about how your mind operates throughout the day. You're rarely fully here. You're reviewing the past, replaying conversations, analyzing events, nursing grievances, dwelling on regrets, or basking in memories of better times. Or you're projecting into the future, planning, worrying, fantasizing, rehearsing scenarios, anticipating outcomes, imagining how things should, or could, or might be. This movement between past and future creates what we might call psychological time. And it's this psychological time that gives birth to the separate self, the ego, the me, who has a history and is moving toward a destination. But here's the thing. The past and future don't actually exist. They're not real in the way the present moment is real. The past is a collection of memories, thoughts, stories appearing now. The future is a collection of projections, fantasies, anxieties appearing now. The only time that actually exists, the only moment that's real, is this one. And in this moment, when you're not adding layers of interpretation and story and temporal reference, there's no problem. There might be pain, there might be discomfort, there might be challenging circumstances, but there's no psychological suffering. Psychological suffering requires time. It requires the story of a past that shouldn't have happened and a future that might not work out. The separate self lives in this psychological time. It's made of time. It's the story of me, who was born, has had certain experiences, has developed certain characteristics, and is heading toward an uncertain future. This story isn't false exactly. It has its practical utility, but it's not the fundamental truth of what you are. It's more like a useful fiction, a necessary convention for navigating social reality and practical life. The problem arises when we mistake this conventional self for our true identity, when we believe that we are nothing more than this historical person with their particular story. When you believe you are only this person, only this story, then naturally you become invested in defending and promoting and improving this character. You need to make sure the story has a happy ending. You need to prove that you're worthy, successful, lovable, significant. You need to avoid anything that threatens the continuity or well-being of this character. And this investment, this identification with the story, is what creates the prison, the sense of being separate and enclosed and vulnerable. But watch what happens when you bring your attention fully to the present moment. Not thinking about the present moment, not trying to be present as a spiritual technique, but simply allowing your awareness to rest in what's actually happening right now. The thoughts about past and future might still arise. They probably will. But you're not feeding them with your attention, not following them down their mental rabbit holes, not believing that they're revealing ultimate truth about you and your life. You're just here, aware, present, alive to this moment. And in this simple present moment awareness, where is the problem? Where is the separate self who needs to become something, or achieve something, or prove something? You can't find it. All you find is awareness itself, and whatever's appearing in awareness right now. Maybe there's a sensation of breathing. Maybe there's the sound of traffic. Maybe there's a thought passing through. Maybe there's a feeling in the body. But there's no solid, continuous, independent entity called me that's having these experiences. There's just the experiencing itself, arising spontaneously and effortlessly in consciousness. This is the invisible door, the recognition that you're not the story, not the character, not the historical person, but the aware space in which all stories appear. And this aware space is completely free, completely open, completely without problems. It doesn't need anything to be different because it's not identified with any particular content. It's like the sky. Clouds pass through it, storms pass through it, airplanes pass through it, but the sky itself remains vast, open, unaffected. Now, when people first hear this teaching, there's often a misunderstanding. They think it means you should stop planning, stop learning from the past, stop thinking about the future. But that's not it at all. The past and future have their legitimate place. You need memory to function in the world. You need to learn from experience. You need to plan for practical matters. The problem isn't with past and future per se. The problem is with believing that past and future are more real than the present, with living predominantly in psychological time rather than in the eternal now. There's a difference between practical use of time and psychological enslavement to time. If you're planning a trip, you need to think about the future, when you'll leave, where you'll go, what you'll need. That's practical time, and it's totally fine. But if while you're planning the trip, you're also worrying about whether you'll enjoy it, whether something will go wrong, whether you'll be happy or disappointed, whether this trip will finally give you the fulfillment you've been seeking, that's psychological time. That's the mind using a practical situation as fuel for its habitual patterns of seeking and fearing, hoping and dreading. Similarly, reflecting on the past can be useful. You can learn from mistakes, appreciate positive experiences, understand patterns in your behavior. But if you're dwelling on the past, wishing it had been different, identifying with old wounds, defining yourself by what happened to you, that's psychological time imprisoning you in a narrative that isn't even real anymore. The spiritually awake person navigates this with natural grace. They use time without being used by time. They can plan and remember while remaining rooted in the present moment, while staying connected to the timeless awareness that underlies all temporal experience. It's like being an actor who's fully committed to their role in the play, but never forgets that they're acting. They deliver their lines with passion and authenticity. They feel the emotions of the character. They engage completely with the drama, but somewhere in their being, they know it's a play. They haven't lost themselves in the character. This is what it means to live in the world, but not of the world, to be fully engaged with life while not being enslaved by life. You participate in the play of existence, the relationships, the work, the challenges, the pleasures, but you're no longer desperately trying to make the play turn out a certain way. You're no longer convinced that your happiness depends on getting a particular outcome. You know yourself as the awareness in which the whole play appears, and from that perspective, every scene is intrinsically complete, intrinsically okay, even the difficult ones. And here's what's so liberating about this. When you're not frantically trying to control life, when you're not resisting what is, when you're not seeking fulfillment in some imagined future, you become available to the fullness of each moment. You can actually taste your food instead of eating while scrolling through your phone. You can actually listen to someone instead of waiting for your turn to talk. You can actually see the sky instead of walking around, lost in thought. The richness of life, which has been here all along, becomes apparent because you're finally present to receive it. This is what mystics mean when they talk about dying before you die, about losing yourself to find yourself, about the gateless gate. They're pointing to this death of the separate self, this release from identification with the story, this recognition of your true nature as timeless awareness. And it's called a death because something does end. The hypnotic trance ends, the habitual contraction ends, the chronic seeking ends. But what dies was never really alive. What dies is just a thought, a belief, a misidentification. Your true nature never dies because it was never born. It's the eternal background to all of life, the unchanging witness to all change, the deathless presence in which birth and death appear. When this becomes your lived reality, not just as a concept, but as a direct recognition, you walk through life differently. There's a lightness, a playfulness, a freedom. Not because your circumstances are necessarily easier, you might still face challenges, losses, difficulties. But your relationship to these circumstances is transformed. You're no longer carrying the additional weight of psychological resistance, of needing things to be different than they are. You're no longer identified with the waves. You know yourself as the ocean. And the ocean is vast enough to contain all waves, calm enough to remain undisturbed beneath all storms, deep enough to be mysterious even to itself. This mystery is important to appreciate. Awakening doesn't mean you suddenly understand everything or have all the answers. In fact, it often brings a deepening of wonder, of awe, of not knowing. The more you recognize the immensity of consciousness, the more you realize how little can be said about it, how inadequate all concepts and descriptions are. It's like trying to capture the ocean in a bottle. You can capture some water, but you haven't captured the ocean. Similarly, you can have insights and understandings and experiences, but the fundamental reality of consciousness remains inexhaustible, ineffable, beyond the reach of thought. This is why true spiritual teachers often speak in paradoxes, in koans, in stories and metaphors, rather than clear logical explanations. They're not being deliberately obscure or mystical. They're simply acknowledging that what they're pointing to can't be captured in concepts. It can only be recognized directly, immediately, in the silence between thoughts, in the gap between words, in the space where you are just aware without knowing what you are. And this not knowing is not a lack or a deficiency. It's the very ground of wisdom, the source of creativity, the opening through which the infinite expresses itself in time. So the invisible door is not something you pass through once, and then you're done. You're enlightened. You've arrived. It's more like a doorway you're always standing in, always invited to notice, always available to return to when you've wandered off into thought and story and identification. It's the eternal present moment, which is not a point in time, but the absence of time, the awareness that exists before, during, and after all temporal experience. And recognizing this doorway, resting in this doorway, living from this doorway, this is what transforms suffering into peace, seeking into finding, separation into wholeness. There's a particular flavor to this recognition of the invisible door that's worth exploring in detail, because it's easy to make it sound too abstract, too philosophical, too disconnected from the messy, embodied reality of being human. The awakening we're talking about is not a transcendence of the body, or an escape from emotions, or a bypass of human life. It's actually the opposite. It's a profound embodiment, a deep acceptance of being human, a complete embrace of all that life brings. When you recognize yourself as awareness, as the space in which experience appears, there's sometimes a misconception that you should become detached, that you should observe your life from a distance, like a witness who's not really involved. But this is a subtle spiritual bypassing, a way of using non-dual philosophy to avoid the full engagement with life that awakening actually calls for. True awakening doesn't create distance from experience. It dissolves the illusory distance that was there all along. Let me explain this carefully because it's crucial. Before awakening, there's a sense of being separate from your experience, of being a subject observing objects, of being someone inside your head watching life happen outside. This creates a kind of split, a fundamental alienation. You feel cut off from life, cut off from your own body, cut off from the present moment. And spiritual practice often begins as an attempt to heal this split, to reconnect with life, to be more present. But if the practice itself reinforces the witness-observed duality, if you're trying to become a detached witness who watches everything without being affected, then you've actually deepened the split rather than healing it. The true recognition is that there's no witness separate from what's witnessed. There's just witnessing, just experiencing, just this undivided field of awareness that includes everything: the body, emotions, thoughts, perceptions, sensations, all of it. You're not awareness observing life. You're awareness being life, appearing as life, expressing itself as this particular body-mind and all of its experiences. There's no separation anywhere. It's one seamless whole. And when this is deeply understood, when this becomes your living reality, something beautiful happens. Instead of becoming detached from emotions, you actually feel them more fully because there's no longer any resistance to them. When sadness arises, it's completely allowed to be there. It flows through the space of awareness, like weather in the sky. There's no one trying to get rid of it, no one claiming it shouldn't be there, no one making a problem out of it. It's just sadness, pure and simple, arising and passing in consciousness. And because there's no resistance, it moves through much more quickly. It's not sticky. It doesn't create the kind of prolonged suffering that comes from fighting with what is. The same is true for anger, fear, anxiety, jealousy, all the so-called negative emotions that we usually try to suppress or overcome. In awakened awareness, they're allowed, not in the sense that you act them out unconsciously or let them control your behavior, but in the sense that they're permitted to exist as natural expressions of the human organism responding to circumstances. And when they're fully felt without resistance, without the additional layer of judging yourself for feeling them, they lose their power to disturb your fundamental peace. This is radically different from the spiritual bypassing approach, where you try to always be positive, always be loving, always be peaceful, and then feel like a failure when human emotions arise. That approach is based on the belief that certain emotions are spiritual and others aren't, that you should transcend your humanity to reach divinity. But the true teaching is that divinity isn't somewhere above or beyond humanity. It's expressing itself as humanity. The whole spectrum of human experience, including the difficult parts, is consciousness exploring itself, knowing itself, experiencing itself. Consider physical pain for a moment. Before awakening, pain is usually experienced as a problem, as something wrong that needs to be fixed. And there's a kind of double pain. There's the actual physical sensation, and then there's the mental emotional resistance to that sensation, the "this shouldn't be happening" thought that creates additional suffering. But in awakened awareness, physical pain might still be present. The body is still subject to injury, illness, discomfort. But the resistance to pain isn't there. Or if it arises, it's recognized as just another sensation, another movement of energy in consciousness. This doesn't mean awakened people are immune to suffering or that they never experience difficulty. That would be a supernatural fantasy. The body still experiences pain. The mind still experiences challenging emotions. Life still brings situations that are hard to navigate. But the fundamental relationship to these experiences is different. There's no longer the sense that you are your pain, that you are your emotion, that you are your difficult circumstances. There's a space around them, a capacity to hold them without being overwhelmed by them. And this space is not something you create or cultivate. It's what you are. It's always been here. The invisible door is the recognition of this space, this awareness that's spacious enough to contain all of experience without being limited or defined by any particular experience. When you know this space as yourself, as your true nature, then the content of experience becomes less significant. Not unimportant, it still matters at its level, but it's no longer what determines whether you're fundamentally okay or not. This is what gives awakened people their characteristic quality of being fully engaged with life while not being desperately attached to outcomes. They can care deeply about things, work passionately toward goals, feel emotions intensely, and yet there's a kind of ease underneath it all, a trust in life, a willingness to let things be as they are. They haven't become passive or resigned. They still act, still respond, still make efforts when appropriate. But the frantic quality is gone. The sense of needing to make life conform to a particular script is absent. You can see this quality in people like Alan Watts himself, who spoke about profound spiritual truths while clearly enjoying a glass of wine, who discussed the illusion of the ego while having a distinct and memorable personality, who pointed toward the transcendence of all forms while being thoroughly embodied and engaged with the particulars of human life. This wasn't hypocrisy or inconsistency. It was the natural expression of someone who had recognized that the absolute and the relative are not separate, that emptiness and form are one reality, that you can be nobody and somebody simultaneously without contradiction. This is actually one of the most difficult aspects of spiritual awakening for the mind to grasp. The mind wants it to be one way or the other. Either you're someone with a personality and preferences and a life, or you're nothing, pure awareness, transcendent of all form. But the reality is both and neither. You are the formless appearing as form, the infinite expressing itself finitely, the eternal playing in time. And this is not a compromise or a middle position. It's the recognition that the apparent opposites were never actually opposed. They're two aspects of one reality, like two sides of a coin. When you live from this recognition, paradox becomes natural. You can be utterly selfless while having healthy boundaries. You can be completely accepting while still working to improve things. You can know that nothing ultimately matters while caring deeply about everything. You can be totally present while making plans for the future. These aren't contradictions that need to be resolved. They're simply different expressions of consciousness in different contexts, different dimensions of the truth showing up as appropriate to the situation. And here's what's so freeing about this. You no longer have to fit yourself into some spiritual ideal, some image of what an awakened person should be like. The whole game of trying to be spiritual, trying to be enlightened, trying to be more conscious, more pure, more evolved, all of that can be dropped. It's recognized as just another form of seeking, another way the ego tries to survive by becoming a spiritual ego. Instead, you can simply be what you are, a unique expression of consciousness, with all your quirks and preferences and imperfections, not despite these things but including them, even celebrating them as part of the infinite diversity of life. This doesn't mean you stop growing or learning or evolving. Personal development continues, character refinement happens, wisdom deepens. But it's no longer driven by the sense that you're not okay as you are, that you need to become something other than what you are to be acceptable. It comes from a different place, from the joy of growth itself, from love of learning, from the natural movement of consciousness toward greater understanding and more skillful expression. It's the difference between improvement driven by lack and improvement driven by fullness, between change motivated by self-rejection and change motivated by self-love. And self-love here doesn't mean narcissism or self-obsession. It means recognizing that what you truly are, this aware presence, this consciousness, loves itself by nature. It delights in its own existence, its own creativity, its own capacity to experience. And since you are this consciousness appearing as a person, loving yourself is simply consciousness loving its own expression, enjoying its own play. It's like an artist who loves their painting, not because it's perfect, but because it's their creation, because it expresses something unique, because it's a manifestation of their creative energy. When you see yourself this way, as consciousness's creative expression, rather than as a separate entity struggling to survive, everything softens. The harsh self-judgment, the constant comparison with others, the feeling that you're not enough or that you need to prove your worth, all of this falls away. Not because you've achieved perfection, but because you've recognized that you were never separate from perfection. Your true nature is already complete, already whole, already divine, and your personality, Your life, your story, is just one of infinite ways this divine consciousness is expressing itself. This is the invisible door from another angle, the recognition that you don't need to become anything because you already are everything. Not in your personal identity, not in your individual story, but in your essential nature. You're not a small wave trying to reach the ocean. You're the ocean appearing as a wave. And once this is clearly seen, the whole spiritual search comes to an end. Not because you've achieved the goal, but because you've recognized that you've never been separate from what you were seeking. Now we need to address something that often creates confusion and resistance when this teaching is presented. If there's no separate self, if everything is just consciousness appearing in various forms, doesn't that mean nothing matters? Doesn't it lead to nihilism, to a lack of meaning, to moral relativism? If it's all just consciousness playing with itself, why bother with anything? Why try to be a good person? Why work toward anything? Why care about anyone? This is a crucial question because it reveals how the mind interprets non-dual truth through a dualistic framework. The mind thinks, if there's no separate self, then there's no one to have meaning, and therefore nothing means anything. But this logic is faulty. It assumes that meaning depends on a separate self, that significance requires someone separate who can attribute significance. But actually, the opposite is true. When you're identified as a separate self, you're constantly imposing meaning on things, trying to make them fit your agenda, trying to extract from them what you need. This is a kind of using, a manipulation of life to serve the needs of the ego. But when you recognize your true nature as consciousness, when the separate self is seen through, meaning doesn't disappear, it becomes inherent in everything. Each moment, each experience, each encounter carries its own significance, its own value, not because you're projecting meaning onto it, but because it's a unique expression of the infinite in form. A flower doesn't need you to appreciate it for it to be meaningful. It's meaningful by virtue of existing, by virtue of being a manifestation of life, of consciousness, of being itself. And when you're not lost in the trance of separation, when you're present to what is, this inherent meaningfulness of existence becomes obvious. In fact, everything becomes more meaningful, not less. When you meet another person and you're not caught up in your own agenda, your own needs, your own story, you can actually see them. You can perceive the miracle of consciousness looking at itself through different eyes, the mystery of subjectivity, the wonder of another unique perspective on existence. Relationships become richer, not shallower. Instead of relating to people as instruments for getting what you need, whether that's validation or security or pleasure or whatever, you relate to them as fellow expressions of the same consciousness that you are. There's recognition, resonance, genuine connection. And this naturally gives rise to compassion, not as a moral obligation, but as a spontaneous expression of unity. When you recognize that the same awareness that's aware through your eyes is aware through everyone's eyes, when you see that we're all waves in the same ocean, then harming another person is recognized as harming yourself. Not because of some moral rule that says you should be nice, but because the apparent separation that would make such harm seem acceptable or beneficial is revealed as illusory. You can't actually hurt another person without the ripples of that harm moving through the whole field of consciousness, which includes you. This is why the great spiritual traditions all converge on essentially the same ethical principles, not because God handed down arbitrary rules, but because when you see reality clearly, when you recognize the fundamental unity beneath apparent multiplicity, certain ways of being naturally arise. Kindness, generosity, honesty, non-violence. These aren't external impositions. They're the natural expression of awakened consciousness. When you're not defending and promoting a separate self, when you're not trying to get something for me at the expense of you, then what remains is a spontaneous benevolence, a genuine wish for the well-being of all. And here's what's beautiful about this. The kindness that flows from awakening is much more authentic and sustainable than moral effort based on should and ought. When you're trying to be a good person because you're supposed to, because it's the right thing to do, because God or society or your conscience demands it, there's always effort, always strain, always the possibility of failure or resentment. You're suppressing selfish impulses in favor of altruistic ones, creating an internal conflict between what you want and what you think you should want. But when kindness arises naturally from seeing the unity of all existence, there's no conflict, no effort, no sense of sacrifice. It's like your right hand helping your left hand when it's injured. It doesn't think, well, I should help because it's the moral thing to do. It just helps naturally because there's no real separation between them. They're both parts of one body. Similarly, when you recognize that all beings are expressions of one consciousness, helping others is as natural as the hand helping itself. This doesn't make you a saint or a perfect person. The personality still has its preferences, its tendencies, its conditioned patterns. You might still get annoyed with people, still have moments of selfishness, still make mistakes. But there's a fundamental orientation toward the well-being of the whole, rather than just the well-being of this particular body-mind. And this orientation doesn't feel like a burden or a sacrifice. It feels like coming home, like remembering what you really are, like aligning with the deepest truth of existence. So the invisible door doesn't lead to nihilism or meaninglessness. It leads to a depth of meaning that the separate self can't access because the separate self is always looking for meaning in the wrong place. It's looking for meaning in achievements, in recognition, in accumulation, in becoming someone significant. But these are all forms of seeking in time, trying to make the future better than the now, trying to use life to complete yourself. And because they're based on the illusion of separation, they can never actually satisfy. You achieve the goal, get the recognition, accumulate the wealth, and there's a moment of satisfaction, but then the seeking starts again. The separate self can never be fulfilled because it's based on a sense of lack that's inherent to separation. But when you recognize yourself as consciousness, as the awareness in which all experience appears, there's a profound sense of completeness that doesn't depend on external circumstances. Not because you've gotten everything you want, but because you've recognized that what you truly are has never lacked anything. Consciousness itself is complete. It doesn't need anything to be other than it is. It's not reaching towards some future fulfillment. It's already whole, already full, already perfect in its own being. And from this wholeness, this completeness, life becomes a creative play rather than a desperate seeking. You can still set goals, still work toward things, still have preferences and desires, but there's a lightness to it, a playfulness, a willingness to engage fully while not taking the outcomes too seriously. It's like children playing a game. They're completely absorbed in it, totally committed, genuinely caring about winning or losing in the moment. But when the game is over, they move on to something else without carrying the results as a burden. They don't define themselves by whether they won or lost. It was just a game, just play. This is how awakened consciousness engages with the game of life. Fully committed, genuinely caring, deeply involved, but not ultimately identified with the outcomes. Because at the deepest level, there's the recognition that it's all a play of consciousness, all a creative expression of the infinite appearing in finite forms. And just as an actor can play different roles, hero one day, villain the next, lover in one scene, enemy in another, consciousness plays all the roles in the cosmic drama. It's the victim and the villain, the saint and the sinner, the seeker and the sought, all at once. This might sound like it makes morality irrelevant, like it doesn't matter what role you play. But again, this misses the point. While it's true that from the absolute perspective, from the viewpoint of pure consciousness, there's no good or bad, no right or wrong. These are just concepts, just relative judgments. We're not living only from the absolute perspective. We're also living as human beings in a relative world where actions have consequences, where choices matter, where some paths lead to suffering and others to well-being. The awakened person navigates both levels simultaneously. They recognize the absolute truth that everything is consciousness, that nothing is ultimately separate or independent, that the whole play of existence is one unified movement. And they also honor the relative truth that in this world of apparent multiplicity, kindness is better than cruelty, honesty is better than deception, Creating is better than destroying. They don't confuse the levels. They don't use absolute truth to bypass relative responsibility. This is what's meant by embodied awakening, recognizing your true nature as consciousness, while still fully inhabiting your humanity, still engaging responsibly with the world, still caring about the quality of your actions and their effects on others. It's not about transcending the world or escaping into some abstract spiritual realm. It's about being fully here, fully present, fully human, but from a completely different understanding of what you are. And this understanding, this recognition of the invisible door, changes everything while changing nothing. The world looks the same. Your life continues in its familiar patterns. The challenges remain. The responsibilities persist. But you're no longer carrying the weight of being a separate self, trying to make it through a hostile universe. You're resting in your true nature, which is vast, open, free, and you're allowing life to flow through you, to express itself through you, to play itself out as your unique story, without being contracted around making that story turn out a certain way. This is the ultimate freedom. Not freedom from circumstances, but freedom within circumstances. Not the freedom to control everything and make it go your way, but the freedom to be at peace with whatever arises, to respond skillfully to what life brings without the underlying current of resistance and fear. And this freedom is not something you achieve through effort or practice, though effort and practice might help remove some of the obstacles to recognizing it. It's what you already are. It's been here all along. It's the invisible door that's always open, always accessible, always inviting you to notice that you've never been separate from the source, the ground, the infinite awareness that you truly are. Let's explore what happens in that moment of recognition, that instant when the invisible door becomes visible, when you suddenly notice what's been here all along. It's important to understand that this isn't necessarily a dramatic experience, though it can be. For some people, there's a sudden shift, a kind of perceptual revolution where everything is seen in a completely new light. The same world that was there a moment ago appears utterly different, radiant with presence, alive with significance. Colors seem more vivid, sounds more clear, everything saturated with an indescribable quality of being. But for many others, the recognition is much more subtle, almost anticlimactic. There's a gentle release, a quiet, oh, a simple noticing that consciousness is here, has always been here, and that you are this consciousness rather than an object appearing in it. No fireworks, no cosmic experiences, just a slight shift in perspective that somehow changes everything. And sometimes the recognition comes and goes. You see it clearly for a moment. Then the old habits of mind reassert themselves and you forget. Then you remember again. Then you forget. It's like learning to see those magic eye pictures where a 3D image is hidden in a pattern. Once you've seen it, you can never not know it's there, but you still have to relax your focus in a certain way to see it again. This is important to understand because many seekers are waiting for some dramatic transformation, some unmistakable enlightenment experience that will prove they've finally made it. And this waiting becomes another form of seeking, another postponement of recognizing what's already true. The recognition we're talking about is not an experience at all. It's the noticing of what's present before, during, and after all experiences. It's the awareness of awareness itself, the consciousness that's conscious of consciousness. And this can't be experienced as an object, because it's the subject, the experiencer, the ground of all experiencing. So if you're waiting for an experience that will confirm you found the invisible door, you're looking in the wrong direction. The door is not found through experience, it's found through recognition, through a subtle shift in perspective, where you stop looking for awareness and recognize that you're looking from awareness, as awareness, being awareness. It's like the eye seeing itself, not in a mirror, which would be seeing a reflection, but directly, immediately, which is impossible in the conventional sense but totally natural in the metaphorical sense we're pointing to. And here's what's crucial. This recognition doesn't require perfect conditions. You don't need to be in a meditative state, sitting in silence, having a spiritual experience. You can recognize your true nature right now, in the middle of ordinary life, while reading these words, while dealing with whatever circumstances are present. Because what you are, this aware presence, is not dependent on circumstances. It's not created by meditation or destroyed by distraction. It's the constant factor in all situations, the unchanging background to all change. But the mind, being what it is, will try to make this complicated. It will try to figure out how to recognize awareness, what technique to use, what practice will lead to the realization. And this is the beautiful trap, the cosmic joke. The mind can't recognize awareness because the mind is an object appearing in awareness. It's like trying to use darkness to see light. The recognition we're pointing to happens in silence, in the gap between thoughts, in the space where the mind naturally comes to rest. This is why all the great spiritual traditions ultimately point beyond technique, beyond practice, beyond effort. They use techniques, meditation, prayer, inquiry, yoga, but only as a way to exhaust the seeking mind, to tire out the effort-making self until it finally gives up and relaxes into what is. And in that relaxation, in that giving up of trying to get somewhere or become something, awareness recognizes itself, not as an achievement, but as a homecoming, not as finding something new, but as noticing what's always been here. When this recognition stabilizes, when it becomes your primary orientation rather than just an occasional glimpse, something profound shifts in how you experience life. Time itself becomes different. Not that clock time disappears. You still show up for appointments, still remember the past, still plan for the future. But psychological time, the chronic sense of incompleteness that keeps you always reaching towards some better moment, gradually dissolves. There's less and less sense of needing to be anywhere other than here, anytime other than now. And with this dissolution of psychological time comes a natural dissolution of problems. Not that practical challenges disappear, but that the sense of having problems, of being someone who's burdened by problems, begins to fade. You start to recognize that most of what you thought were problems were actually just thoughts about situations, stories about circumstances, mental interpretations overlaid on neutral events. The event itself, the thing that's actually happening, is usually manageable, workable, dealable. It's the story about the event, the meaning you're giving it, the implications you're seeing, the fears you're projecting. That's what creates the sense of overwhelming difficulty. When you're identified as a separate self, living in psychological time, every situation becomes loaded with significance. A critical comment from a colleague isn't just a comment, it's a threat to your self-image, a confirmation of your inadequacy, evidence that you're not respected or valued. A financial setback isn't just a practical matter to address, it's proof that you're failing at life, that you'll never be secure, that the future is frightening. A health concern isn't just a body sensation to observe, it's a catastrophe waiting to happen, a sign that you're losing control, that mortality is closing in. But when you're resting in awareness, when you're no longer identified as a vulnerable separate self, these same situations show up completely differently. The critical comment is just sound waves in the air, words appearing in consciousness. There might be a physical sensation of contraction, an emotional response, but it's not personal in the way it used to be. It's just energy moving through the body-mind. The financial situation is just numbers, just practical circumstances to respond to appropriately. The health concern is just sensation, just the body communicating information that may or may not require action. This doesn't mean you become cold or uncaring or unresponsive. If anything, you become more responsive because you're not caught up in the psychological drama, the story about what everything means. You can assess situations clearly, make good decisions, take appropriate action without the overlay of fear and resistance that usually complicates everything. You're like a clear mirror that reflects everything accurately because it's not distorted by wanting things to be different than they are. And relationships. Oh, relationships become so much simpler when you're not trying to get something from them, not using them to complete yourself, not needing others to validate your existence or confirm your worth. When you know yourself as complete awareness, as consciousness that's already whole, you can finally meet another person as they actually are, rather than as a character in your story. You can love them without needing them, enjoy them without grasping them, support them without trying to fix them. This is perhaps the greatest gift you can give another person: your presence, your full attention, your ability to be with them without agenda. Not the presence of a spiritual person who's trying to be present, which is just another form of ego, but the natural presence that arises when you're not lost in thought, not consumed by your own drama, not looking for anything from the encounter. People feel this. They might not be able to articulate what's different about being with you, but they sense that they're being met, seen, recognized in a way that's uncommon. And this quality of presence, this ability to be fully here, available, alive to what is, this is what spiritually awake people notice in others who've passed through the invisible door. Not because they have supernatural powers of perception, but because there's a resonance, a recognition of the same awareness looking out through different eyes. It's like tuning forks vibrating at the same frequency. When one sounds, the other naturally responds. When consciousness recognizes itself in another form, there's a kind of silent acknowledgement, a meeting beyond words. This is why awakened people are sometimes drawn to each other, why genuine spiritual community forms not around belief or practice, but around shared recognition. It's not that they're special or exclusive or better than others. It's simply that when you've seen through the illusion of separation, when you've noticed the invisible door, you naturally gravitate toward others who've noticed it too, not out of need or seeking, but out of the simple joy of consciousness recognizing itself, celebrating its own nature in different expressions. But it's crucial to understand that this recognition, this awakening, doesn't make you perfect or beyond all human limitation. The personality continues with its tendencies and preferences. The body-mind continues with its conditioning and habits. You might still have areas of unconsciousness, patterns you haven't fully seen through, behaviors that arise automatically without awareness. Awakening is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of conscious living, of bringing awareness to more and more areas of life, of allowing consciousness to illuminate and transform the patterns that no longer serve. This is why some teachers speak of awakening and then the process of embodiment, of integration, of allowing the recognition to penetrate more deeply into every aspect of life. The initial recognition might be sudden, but the lived expression of that recognition continues to deepen and mature over time. You become more and more consistent in resting as awareness, less and less seduced by the movements of mind, more and more able to stay present, even in challenging circumstances. And this process isn't about achieving some final state of permanent enlightenment where you never have another unconscious moment. That's another fantasy of the seeking mind, another way to postpone the recognition that you're already what you're seeking. The process is more like remembering and forgetting, recognizing and getting lost, noticing and overlooking, in a gradually shifting balance where the remembering becomes more frequent and the forgetting less sticky, until eventually the recognition becomes so stable, so primary, that it's always there in the background, even when you're caught up in the foreground drama of life. Now we come to perhaps the deepest aspect of this teaching, the most subtle recognition that completes the circle and reveals why the door was always invisible. Everything we've discussed, awareness, consciousness, the present moment, the dissolution of the separate self, all of this is still pointing at something. There's still a subtle duality in the very act of pointing, in the structure of teaching, in the relationship between you as the reader or listener, and these words as the instruction. As long as there's someone trying to understand, someone seeking to recognize, someone working to notice the invisible door, that very someone is the last veil, the final obscuration. This is what the Zen masters were getting at with their impossible koans and paradoxical teachings. Show me your original face before your parents were born. What is the sound of one hand clapping? These aren't riddles to solve with the intellect. They're designed to exhaust the mind, to push it to the point where it gives up trying to figure things out, and suddenly the answer becomes obvious, not as a conceptual understanding, but as a direct recognition that transcends the question entirely. The ultimate teaching is that there's no one to teach and nothing to learn. Not because you already know everything in the conventional sense, but because what you truly are has never been ignorant. The separate self seems to lack understanding, seems to need instruction, seems to be on a journey from ignorance to knowledge. But the separate self is just a thought, just a pattern of conditioning, just a habitual contraction of consciousness. It has no actual existence apart from the believing of it. And you, the real you, the awareness that's reading these words right now, you've never been separate, never been ignorant, never needed to find your way home, because you've never left. This is the final gateless gate, the last step that's no step at all. It's the recognition that there's no one recognizing, no awareness becoming aware of itself, no consciousness achieving self-knowledge. There's just this immediate, present, undeniable fact of being, of existing, of experiencing. No one having the experience, no one aware of the awareness, just the experiencing itself, the awareness itself, the being itself, without subject or object, without inside or outside, without beginning or end. When this is fully seen, when even the subtle sense of being a recognizer falls away, what remains is so simple, so ordinary, so absolutely obvious that words become absurd. It's not special, it's not mystical, it's not an altered state or a higher consciousness. It's just this, whatever this is, however it is, right now. The seeing of these words, the understanding of these concepts, the awareness of whatever sensations and thoughts and feelings are present, not happening to you, not being experienced by you, but simply happening, simply being experienced, simply arising in the emptiness that's simultaneously the fullness of everything. And here's the extraordinary thing. This recognition doesn't change anything. The world continues exactly as before. Your life goes on with its familiar patterns. Challenges still arise, pleasures still appear. The whole dance of existence continues without interruption. But the context is completely transformed. Where there used to be a person having a life, there's now just life living itself. Where there used to be someone trying to control outcomes, there's now just outcomes happening. Where there used to be a seeker looking for enlightenment, there's now just the clear recognition that enlightenment is already the case. It's always been the case. It couldn't be otherwise. This is what's so frustrating for the mind to accept. It wants enlightenment to be special, to be an achievement, to be something that happens to some people and not others, something that makes you different or better or more evolved. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Awakening is the recognition that there's nothing special about you, that you're not actually a separate entity who could be either enlightened or not enlightened, that the whole framework of spiritual seeking is based on a misunderstanding of what you are. You're not a person who sometimes experiences awareness. Your awareness appearing as a person, appearing as experiences, appearing as the entire play of existence. And from this perspective, every person is enlightened. Every experience is sacred. Every moment is complete exactly as it is. Not because everything is perfect in the conventional sense. There's still suffering, still conflict, still difficulty. But because everything is an expression of consciousness, a manifestation of awareness, a movement of the infinite in finite form. This is why truly awakened beings often appear so utterly ordinary. They're not walking around in permanent bliss states, or constantly talking about their enlightenment, or displaying supernatural powers. They're just being human, with a complete absence of self-consciousness about being human. They're doing ordinary things, cooking, cleaning, working, relating, but without the background noise of psychological seeking, without the constant sense of incompleteness that drives most human activity. And if you meet such a person, you might not even realize they're awake. They're not wearing spiritual robes or radiating visible light or speaking in mystical riddles. They're just present, just here, just available. They meet you where you are without trying to elevate you or enlighten you or fix you. They reflect back your own consciousness, your own awareness, your own capacity to be present, not by telling you about it, but simply by being it, by living it, by expressing it in every gesture and word and moment. This is the invisible door in its ultimate form, not a threshold to cross, but the recognition that you're already on both sides. that there's no inside or outside, no here or there, no now or then. There's just this seamless, undivided, ever-present reality. And you are this reality knowing itself, experiencing itself, expressing itself in your particular form. Not you as a separate person, but you as consciousness itself, temporarily appearing as this person, playing this role, having this experience. And when this is fully recognized, when even the subtle separation between the recognizer and the recognized dissolves, what remains is beyond all description. Not because it's mystical or supernatural, but because it's too simple, too immediate, too intimate to be captured in concepts. It's the taste of water, the color of the sky, the sound of silence. It's what's looking out from behind your eyes, what's listening to these words, what's aware of awareness itself. It's what you've always been, what you could never not be, what you'll always be even when this particular body-mind dissolves back into the elements. This is the ultimate freedom, the final liberation, the complete resolution of all seeking. Not because you've found what you were looking for, but because you've recognized that you never lost it. The invisible door was always open because there was never actually a door. There was just space, infinite, aware, loving space, appearing as all of this, being all of this, experiencing all of this. And you are this space, this awareness, this consciousness, eternally free, eternally present, eternally complete. And the beautiful paradox is that recognizing this changes everything and nothing. You still have to pay your bills, still have to navigate relationships, still have to deal with the practical necessities of life. But you do it all from a completely different context, a completely different understanding of who you are and what this is. You do it lightly, playfully, without the weight of psychological seeking, without needing life to give you what you already are. This is what spiritually awake people notice, not just in others who've recognized the invisible door, but in existence itself. They notice that the door was never there, that the seeking was always unnecessary, that freedom is not a destination, but the very ground they've been standing on all along. And from this recognition flows everything that needs to flow: love, joy, peace, compassion, wisdom, creativity, aliveness. Not as achievements or attainments, but as natural expressions of consciousness delighting in its own existence, playing in the field of time and space, creating and destroying, appearing and disappearing, forever at rest in itself, while dancing as everything. This is the teaching, not to give you something you don't have, but to point you toward what you've always been. Not to take you somewhere else, but to help you recognize where you already are. Not to make you into someone spiritual, but to reveal that what you truly are is beyond all categories, all labels, all concepts of spiritual and not spiritual, awakened and unawakened, enlightened and unenlightened. You are the infinite appearing as the finite, the eternal expressing itself in time, the absolute playing as the relative. You are the invisible door, the gateless gate, the pathless path. You are what you've been seeking, and you've been this all along.